comes with a charging cable and built-in earphone jack. Free. Wonder Bible features 10 free preloaded meditation music tracks. There's more. For our best offer yet, you can double your offer. Just pay a separate fee. We'll even ship it to you free. 100% risk-free 30-day money-back guarantee. Order now.
To order the Wonder Bible for $39.99 plus processing and handling, call 1-800-916-1690 or order online at wonderbible.com.
Who was it, your unexpected call?
Forbes magazine raves. The Post moves like a bullet.
Would you like me to catch you up?
I say we can. He says we can't. There, you're caught up.
It's the #1 movie to see this year.
If we don't publish, the country will lose.
The Post, rated PG-13.
Hi, I'm Seth Meyers, and I'm hosting this year's Golden Globes, and we have a lot to talk about.
It's Hollywood's Party of the Year.
Sit down!
The most tainted man.
Talented?
Talented man.
Everyone's gonna be there. What's that? Oh, yeah, no, I forgot about him. Well, good. No one wants him there.
The Golden Globes, Sunday on NBC. And start early with Live from the Red Carpet, starting at 4 Eastern, 1 Pacific on E!
Win up to $100,000 at Muckleshoot Casino with our Meet the Presidents giveaway. Earn entries daily through January 26th with a free entry Thursdays and double entries Fridays. Every Friday in January starting at 4 p.m., lucky participants will play Meet the Presidents for a chance to win up to $100,000. Plus, arrive early for a chance to win cash throughout the night. Visit MuckleshootCasino.com for details.
When the world hopes.
How many people have you uncovered here? How many people have you rescued?
When the world cries.
They've been holding hostages in their houses, using them as human shields.
When it erupts.
This is Britain's 4th terror attack in as many months.
Or holds its breath.
How does the U.S. de-escalate against Kim Jong-un?
Our journalists will be there, helping you grasp the world.
This is a big confrontation now.
And all its many emotions.
There has been no collusion between us and the Russians. Now, there has been collusion between Hillary Clinton, the DNC, and the Russians. Unfortunately, you people don't cover that very much, but the only collusion is between Hillary and the Russians and the DNC and the Russians, and one of those things.
President Trump deflecting a question about the FBI's Russia investigation back to former campaign rival Hillary Clinton and the DNC. The president's accusations follow a letter that 2 Republican members of the Senate Judiciary Committee sent to the Justice Department on Friday. Senators Lindsey Graham and Charles Grassley asked the DOJ to consider charges against former British intelligence operative Christopher Steele, saying he may have misled federal law enforcement. Now, Steele is the author of that dossier on Trump's alleged Russia connections. Dianne Feinstein, the ranking Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, called the recommendation of charges, quote, another effort to deflect attention from what should be the committee's top priority, determining whether there was collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia to influence the election. Joining me now are Barbara McQuaid, former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, and Naveed Jamali, former FBI double agent and author of the book, How to Catch a Russian Spy. Barbara, I'll start with you. When you have 2 members of the Senate committee that has oversight over the Justice Department recommending charges against someone, how does that impact the investigation?
Well, you know, the FBI will receive that recommendation. They get referrals like that all the time from various sources, and they'll look at it on its own merits and decide whether it merits any consideration at all. What's odd about this is that they say that there is this potential crime, but the evidence of it is contained in a classified document, so the world can't see what it is they're even talking about. The FBI will look at it. They get calls all the time from all kinds of sources. Some of them are frivolous, some of them have merit, and they'll take it for what they believe it's worth.
Now, Naveed, Republicans really seem to be focused on the Steele dossier more than ever before. We know just a few days ago there was a New York Times report that said that it was not the dossier but a tip from an Australian diplomat who spent the night drinking with George Papadopoulos that actually caused the FBI to launch its investigation. Do you sense that Republicans are focused in the right place here?
No, I mean, well, let's take that back for a second. If you're a Republican and you want to take shade or direction away from Donald Trump and his potential criminal actions, then yeah, this is the right move. But everyone else is looking at this and saying this makes absolutely no sense. It is nothing more than a partisan move, and a poor one at that. I mean, look, what my panelist is saying is true. If Michael Steele lied to the FBI, then the FBI investigators, if they felt that it was serious enough, would have brought charges themselves. To have a Republican who wasn't directly involved in talking to Michael Steele, we know he hasn't spoken to the House at least, to bring this forward, it's ridiculous. It's nothing more than partisanship. It's as simple as that.
And Barbara, the president has repeatedly insisted that he is not under investigation by Mueller's team. If you have an investigation that is looking into a presidential campaign, is it really possible that the person at the center of that campaign wouldn't be a part of the probe?
Well, I think it's really important to remember the early facts of all of this. We've seen the memos from Jim Comey where he talked about President Trump asked Comey whether the president was under investigation way back in January. And what Comey told him was no, but I don't want to say that publicly because I'm concerned that if that status should change at some point, then I will have a duty to correct that publicly and announce to the world that you are under investigation. So it seems quite possible and maybe even likely that that status has changed in light of all of the things that we have learned since that time. And at no time did Comey say you've been cleared or exonerated, just that you are not at the moment a target of the investigation. So I think that it's quite probable that he is now a target of the investigation.
And Barbara, I want to ask you about Paul Manafort, too. We know that he filed a lawsuit against the Justice Department this week. He says that the charges against him had nothing to do with alleged Russian election hacking. Does he have a case here?
No, I don't think so. In fact, I think the fact that he filed it as a separate civil case is a real sign that even he knows that he doesn't have merit to it. If he did, he would have filed a motion to dismiss the indictment in the court where he's charged. I think he didn't want to disrupt the things there and anger that judge, so he filed it as this separate civil lawsuit. But if you look at the mandate that was given to Robert Mueller and the regs under which he looks at it, there's nothing wrong with charging him with things that are illegal, that were within the scope of that mandate, even though they don't relate to Russia. It's sort of like the plain view doctrine. If a law enforcement agent is somewhere he's allowed to be and he discovers a crime, he's allowed to seize that evidence and pursue that crime. Similarly, with Robert Mueller, if he is looking into the Russia matter and he discovers criminal activity by Paul Manafort involving money laundering and all kinds of illegal financial transactions, he doesn't have to ignore that. He's allowed to pursue it, and that's what he's done.
So what do you think the point is here for Manafort in filing this suit? And does he think this might become a little bit of a distraction for the team that's doing this investigation? What do you think he's doing? Barbara?
Yeah, I think that could be. I also think it may possibly be a strategy to make an end run around the gag order that the judge issued in the criminal case. She ordered the parties not to say anything publicly. If you look at the civil case, he talks about how he went to the FBI, was questioned by the FBI about these very transactions a few years ago, and no charges were brought then. Only now that he's under the scrutiny of the Russia investigation has the FBI and Robert Mueller chosen to bring charges. I think he's trying to throw out there in the public some sort of idea that this is politically motivated. He couldn't do it because of the gag order, so by filing this independent lawsuit, he's able to get his story or his theory out there in the public.
And Naveed, the president has been saying no collusion, no collusion. We've heard that a lot lately. Collusion isn't necessarily a crime, so what legal jeopardy, if any, could the president ultimately be in here?
Well, he's right. I mean, collusion is not even a term of art in the legal circle, as I understand it. It's certainly not a tactic that intelligence agencies use when they're recruiting people. But to kind of piggyback on Barbara's point, I think when it comes to the mandate that Mueller has, that's the answer to the question here. That, you know, this investigation may very well start, and in fact did start with investigating to see whether any Russians not only had contact, but we would call in spy world, tasked any Americans. And what that means is that were they given direction to go collect information in exchange for money, something potentially innocuous. In order to do that, you investigate that person. You're going to go through a whole list of people. You know, there have been numerous people that have contact with Russians. When you're going through that, you're going to check things like cell phone records, text messages, bank records. And in the course of checking those things for the primary investigation, it is completely plausible that you may find evidence of another crime that has nothing to do with Russia. And I think that when it comes to President Trump, a man who as a private citizen has gone through numerous bankruptcies, bankruptcy, has been the subject of numerous lawsuits, has not released his tax returns. I think he's probably rightfully so very nervous that the primary investigation to Russia, which is going to look at his tax returns, look at his business dealings, is going to potentially result in discovering criminal, if not untoward activity that he may have had prior to entering the presidency, which is all fair game.
And what do you think the timeline is here? Do we have a quick resolution to this, or are we looking at months more of this investigation?
I think that... Go ahead, Barbara.
No, I was going to say, I think we have many months to go in an investigation like this. It's so complex. This idea that it would be over by Thanksgiving and then by Christmas was always fanciful. I think Robert Mueller works with incredible urgency. I'm sure he is pushing his team to work as quickly as possible. But when you have facts all over the world and evidence all over the world in a case as complex as this, I think we can expect it to continue for many more months.
And Naveed, your thought?
I agree. I think that there is parts of this that I think will certainly come to a head. At the end of the day, I fall back on the idea that impeachment is a political process, and if we are to go down that road, I am very convinced at this point that the Republicans are not going to push that through, and it's probable that Donald Trump will serve out his term and perhaps decide not to run to re-election because he's likely to be primaried. But I think Mueller will come to a conclusion. I think the House and Senate investigations will come to a conclusion. I think Barbara's timeline is probably on the money.
All right, Barbara McQuaid, Naveed Jamali, we appreciate your perspective. Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Next up, an investigation is launched after the home of one of Roy Moore's accusers goes up in flames.